we're looking at this in contrast to culture and society, what we're looking at is a life that is a mission statement life, a purpose-driven life. Our life is not our own. It's not for us. It's not for our own enjoyment and our own pleasure. It's for the Lord to be magnified through. Hello and welcome back to another video here on the channel. We're gonna do something a little different, but it's something that I'm really passionate about. And as a single woman, talking about being married versus being single and the purposeless and loneliness that often young women describe, or even middle-aged women who are not married describe, is something that we need to address, and we need to be addressing it in a biblical context. So I'm going to do my best to comment on some things that I'm seeing, and especially in relationship to a lot of the things that we're seeing in the Trump administration politically. See, I spun it in there. We are talking about politics, even though we're talking about a different topic. But if you've not seen yet, Trump has an executive order out just recently on IVF. And if you as a believer don't fully understand the process of IVF, I'm working on a video right now to be released in the next couple weeks around the process of IVF and how we should be biblically looking at IVF. But as a little bit of a precursor to that, essentially IVF and the process is a form of abortion. It's just a very, very early term abortion. And so what we're doing is we're hand-picking an embryo, right? An egg that has already been fertilized and is being nurtured in a laboratory, and we're picking the best out of, maybe a dozen, maybe 6, maybe 3, right? Basically, the more you have, the better chance you have at picking the best. And then from that space, choosing, hey, do you want a boy? Do you want a girl? Going through this process of actually handpicking and, intervening as mankind on this beautiful natural order of creating and bringing forth a child, and doing that in a way that dehumanizes and puts us in control and power in a way that we were not meant to be. And the reason that I'm bringing that into this conversation is because for a very long time, as a young woman, I have heard my peers often say, first and foremost, before even wanting to be a wife, they want to be a mother. Even before, wanting to be a good wife and wanting to love their husband and live with somebody and be married to somebody, most importantly, that she can be a helpmeet to and enjoy that, not see that as a demeaning role, but see that as a gift and a privilege and an honor of her life. And to be complementary to each other, to be passionate about what each other is passionate about, to support each other in really living a life that is glorifying and purposeful to the Lord. And then in that love and in that passion for each other and for serving the Lord, children are created. And that's a very natural process. But when we walk into being a young woman and saying, I want to be a mother, so I'm going to go try to get married so that I can be a mother, because obviously as a believer, we hold a distinct role of, sexual activity within the form of marriage, right? So that's a huge priority for those who want to follow the Lord and believe in what the Bible says. And so because of that, it's sort of this idea of like young women wanting to get married because they want to be moms. And I think this is really sad. As a single woman observing this, I think this is really sad because we miss out on actually falling in love with not just our husband, but our potential father of our child. And I think that this has a lot to do with the social and political agendas that are being pushed and created and condoned and affirmed, not just by Satan and liberal culture, but also, again, being affirmed and condoned and sort of, accepted by Christian culture, within the church, within the design of our conversations and our friendships and the different elements of our everyday lives. The very content on our phones can be pushing an agenda that has us at the forefront of, I want to be a mom, I want to be a mother, I want to have babies, I want to have children, and yet not really desiring the order of our role and our privilege. And when we're looking at this from a biblical context, and we're looking at this in contrast to culture and society, what we're looking at is a life that is a mission statement life, a purpose-driven life. Our life is not our own. It's not for us. It's not for our own enjoyment and our own pleasure. It's for the Lord to be magnified through. And so whether we're struggling through infertility, or we're struggling with being single and feeling lonely, or we're struggling with not having a particular career or element of our lives that we would desire, that even in that struggle, even in that giving up of our wishes and our desires, we can glorify the Lord and bless Him and worship Him and show Him as ultimately the Redeemer of all things, whether that is something that is really hard and difficult and you're in a season of loss or struggle or sadness or loneliness, or you're in a season of joy and excitement and blessing. Regardless of which season you're in, the ultimate objective of those things in your lives can be redeemed and is redeemed by the Lord to bring us back to blessing and honoring Him. Now, I don't want to talk about this generally. I want to talk about this very specifically because I am 26 years old and I've experienced a lot of struggle and suffering physically, mentally, and emotionally in my life than most young women my age. In fact, there are many times where some of my dearest, oldest friends will, slip up and say something along the lines of like, oh, well, you'll know what this feels like when you get older. And often I have to correct them and say, my friend, you don't have to be old to feel that kind of pain. You don't have to be old to understand the depth of that sadness. And I think in some ways our kind of, categories of ages and circumstances and experiences is sort of our way to feel special and exclusive, and yet there's so much blessing and encouragement in understanding that we get each other, that we get the loneliness and sadness, and ultimately bringing that I get you to God gets you, Christ gets you, because He literally was here on earth experiencing the most extreme elements of every single sorrow, loneliness, and pain that you've experienced, and not sinning, glorifying and worshiping the Lord in all of it. And He is the one that is wielding His strength through you in your weakness to worship through the loneliness of singleness, or to worship through the sadness of not being able to have children in this season of your life, or to, kind of wrestle with and still ultimately worship and love the Lord even through a loss of a family member. And there's many other examples that I may not be giving right now that you may be experiencing. And I just want you to know, I'm just kind of putting a blanket of compassion and love on all of you in whatever season you're going through. But I think that there's this misconception of like singleness and marriage and motherhood and our role as not just individuals, but as a community. There's this real misconception about what's meant to be versus what God can actually redeem and use. It's like we're spending so much time looking at, well, God, God's original perfect design was that, a man and woman would be married and have children and have generations and generations of this process continuing on and on and on, that children are a blessing. And so then us single women are looking at it and saying, well, then apparently we're not fulfilling this design that God has given us in a fallen world, and we're not being blessed with children, and so we're not being a blessing. So what are we supposed to do? And we're spending so much time looking over here, forgetting that our God is a God that redeems. Our God is a God that takes our whole life and says, no, I am not removed from your circumstances. I am not removed from your pain, and I am not removed from the purpose that I have for you, even in the midst of a fallen world. This is something that's been so deeply encouraging to me as a 26-year-old single woman who's dated very little in my life, and being very motivated and very driven and very service-oriented, and seeing the blessing of, even though I'm not married, the ways in which I can bless other moms and other women who are in different seasons of their lives than I am of mine, and seeing the blessing and the perspective that I can bring to encourage them, and that ultimately they're encouraging me. And that has been something that has been so profound and so exciting, whether that is me, playing with little kids on Tuesday mornings or reading books to a dear, dear elderly friend of mine who needs some help during the week. Like, there's so much blessing in being able to serve, even if it's in creative, unconventional ways. And this is one of those elements where, like, I'm such a creative person. I'm always thinking outside of the box. And I think God wants us to be like that. God gave us an imagination. He gave us a mind to think and problem solve and be the caretaker over creation. And so when we see gaps in needs needing to be met, we get to be creative in saying, how can I serve that person? How can I love that person? Who do I know that could serve that person? And for us as single women, we have that opportunity and that privilege to be able to step into that role in a very unique way, and in a way that may actually bless that person more than someone who was in the traditional realm of God's design, somebody who was married and had kids. We actually have a capacity for God to redeem our time in a way that is extra helpful and extra supportive of that person. And I think that is one of the parts of God that just has me in awe. Like, he doesn't just say, well, you messed up. Now your entire earth and planet and creation, everything that's created is being created in the context of, fallenness and sin and destruction. I guess, whatever. No, he says, no, I'm going to redeem this. I'm going to redeem you. I'm going to redeem these circumstances. It doesn't mean I'm going to make them perfect and change all of them. It means that you can worship and love me and honor me and be used by me and through me and for me, even in this circumstance that's really, really hard. And so when we're looking at what's happening with the Institute of Marriage in our country and the Institute of Childbirth and having children and the processes that are being manipulated and changed and medically and chemically controlled, like things like IVF, what we're seeing is a pulling away from a respect and reverence of who God is and his role and our role. And what we're seeing instead is a creating of our own God, a creating of our own control and power and authority over things that we actually don't have authority and power over. And I fear that while there are many, many individuals that we live with, our neighbors, our children, maybe your siblings that are, born from, chemically or medically controlled ways of having children, what we're going to start to see and continue to see really is a continued manipulation of that process. So much so that we're creating, our own forms of humanity. We're creating our own forms of creation in a way that we were never designed or meant to do and be. And so we have to search through the Word of God and say, what does God say about what his role is in creation and what my role is? And am I honoring that and celebrating when that is celebrated in my society and in my culture? And am I calling forward the lies or, the lack of truth that is present in my society and culture when we're not respecting and revering God, but we're actually making and building up our own gods and our own rules and our own laws? And so whether you're a single individual who's struggling with purpose and trying to figure out, where do I fit in all of this? How can I really be used by the Lord to have a purpose in my life even when I'm not married? Or you're a young married woman and you're struggling to have children and you're saying, God, I would love to have children, but I also want to obey and honor the process in which you have given and you have created. And this is not that. This is a form of murder and abortion. Then I get to be faithful and honor you even in a lack of children. And that's a really hard struggle. And there may be a lot of you in the comments that hate me for saying that. That you may feel like it, how cruel to encourage somebody to kind of wrestle with and be at peace with this possibility of not having children. Versus going through a process that is not sanctioned by the Lord. And I would just encourage you that what do you love most? Do you love the possibility of having children more than you do of obeying and honoring and worshiping the Lord? And if that's true, that will be reflected by our culture and our society and the priorities that are made by the leaders that are placed over us. And we're starting to see that, and we're going to continue to see it, and we're going to continue to see it get heightened increasingly. So that's not to discourage or to like be depressing per se, but we want to be truthful and honest about kind of where culture and society is going, and the opportunity, therefore, that we have to say, God can redeem even an imperfect life. God can redeem an imperfect world that I live in, and He can use me in such a profound way and be the power wielding through me to bless and serve and have a servant heart towards other individuals, towards other believers, towards people in my community. And to not be so stuck and focused on my own woes and my own struggles in a way of hopelessness and despair, but to bring those things before the Lord and to honor Him in all things. And I really encourage you, whatever season you're in, that is something that is always available to you. And God is waiting eagerly for that to be the desire of your heart, because that is indeed the desire of His. I hope this was encouraging to you. If you have particular things you want to talk through, or you have things that you want to add in the comments, please do that below. Please be respectful. I know that this topic in particular is a challenging one for many of you and for many of us. So please be respectful and kind in the comments. And I have the prerogative, of course, to remove any comments that I don't find to fit into that criteria of being kind and respectful. But I love seeing your comments, and I love seeing what you're thinking through and praying through, and what you're discerning through as we see the direction that the world is taking. I will see you, my friend, on the next video.